Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Leadership Lecture Series. We are honored to have with us Mr. Anil Ananthaswamy, distinguished alumnus of IIT Madras, 1985 batch from BTech Electrical Engineering. He is an award-winning science journalist and author. Mr. Anil's journey from software engineer to renowned science communicator highlights his dedication to exploring and explaining some of the most profound scientific questions of our time. He is the author of four acclaimed books: The Edge of Physics, The Man Who Wasn't There, Through Two Doors at Once, and Why Missions Learn, each addressing significant topics in cosmology, neuroscience, quantum physics, and artificial intelligence. Today, in his talk titled Charting Your Own Course, Mr. Anil will share his insights from his remarkable career and creative process. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Anil Ananthaswamy.
Okay. Yeah, like I was saying, it also feels really odd to be giving a talk about one's own career. Um, Firstly, it doesn't come naturally to me. I do talk about it with friends every now and then, but as a lecture, that seems really weird. But also, it feels odd because it seems to be that you give this kind of lectures when you're at the end of your career, which also doesn't feel very nice when you think about it. So, hopefully, that's not the case. So, I just want to tell you a little bit about how the first 10 years of my career, which led to the transition from being a software engineer to becoming a writer. And then, more importantly, I want to talk a little bit about the four books that Rahul mentioned, um, just to give you a sense for what was motivating me to write these books and the kind of reporting and research that it took to get these books published. So I graduated in '85 with a degree in electronics, which at that time was called LC, low current, I think. I forget. I don't know if that distinction still holds here. But and then went to the US to do my master's, did my master's in computer engineering at the University of Washington. And then came back. I wanted to work in India, so I came back to Bangalore. And those were the early days of the software industry in India, which meant that I got shipped right back to the US. So ended up in Dallas for a while, and then eventually decided to take up a job in Berkeley, California. And I joined a small company that was building network management systems, distributed network management systems, really large scale systems. And it was an exciting time. And what I didn't realize, in fact, what almost nobody in the company realized, is that we were building what would turn out to be precursors to the world's first web servers. We just didn't know. And of course, because we didn't know, we didn't make anything of it. It all fell apart eventually. But it was an amazing time. But throughout that period, I was noticing something about myself. Actually, I wouldn't say I was noticing something at that time. It's only in retrospect. Even in Bangalore, when I was the first year and a half after coming back from the US, I found myself being more interested in figuring out the basics of how things work rather than, working for a software company or building these big systems. This will date me more than, I've already dated myself by telling you I graduated in '85, but I'm not sure most of you will remember, but back in the '80s there was a book called Xinu is not Unix, XINU is not Unix, and the book was basically an excellent primer about building an operating system yourself. So even as I was sitting in my software company trying to do some telecom stuff, part of me was just trying to build this OS from scratch. And that kind of desire to really just understand the basics and then somehow communicate those ideas to others was already there. I never quite recognized it early on. And the first few years of being in the company in Berkeley, the software industry had just started transitioning to from coding in C in procedural programming to object-oriented programming. And now, of course, nobody realizes that there was a time when we didn't know what object-oriented programming was. But so I was in the midst of that transition. And again, instead of trying to focus on the job at hand, which was, write these big distributed systems software, I was trying to figure out how to implement something that I had previously done in Bangalore, which was implementing a communications protocol. Again, this would be something most of you would not have been aware of anymore, because back then we used to have this 7 layers of communication protocols, and I was focused on something called the data link layer. Had worked on it here in Bangalore, and when the transition to object-oriented programming was happening, my interest was, to figure out how I could code what I had previously done using C in C++. And as I was doing that, it became clear that I had a didactic tool with me to teach people about object-oriented programming. So I ended up teaching a course at UC Berkeley's evening classes, extension classes. And then that led to my first book, which was a software book on data communications and object-oriented programming. Still, it hadn't occurred to me that that was something that could potentially be a long-term career in terms of writing for a living. About 4 or 5 years into that software journey, I began to feel dissatisfied with software itself. Not the act of writing software, which I enjoyed very much, but at the end of the day, it somehow felt, for me personally, fairly meaningless. Again, this is completely personal. I know a lot of friends of mine who find deep meaning in what they're doing, and I appreciate that tremendously. For me, it didn't seem to hold much interest. And I was beginning to explore writing. At that time, mid-90s, I was thinking of writing fiction, and I was writing fiction. I quit my job and decided to become a contractor, consultant, whatever you want to call it, so that I could work for 6-7 months, and then the rest of the time I would take off and come back to India and ponder about writing. And at that time, it was still, I was thinking about fiction. It wasn't, I hadn't realized that there was another thing that really interested me, which was science, just basic science, physics, biology in particular, neuroscience. And I would read those books, popular science books, and never put 2 and 2 together that somebody else must have written those books that I was so enjoying. But anyway, at some point, a serendipity happened where I discovered a writing program in California, at the University of California, Santa Cruz, which was specifically about science writing. So it was a 1-year boot camp where you just go there and get completely immersed. And I thought, what could go wrong? 1 year is not too long a time. So I applied, got in, and did that course. And then that led to an internship with a magazine in London called Neuroscience. I went there for 6 months. And I still remember that whole transition period, because I was already in my mid-30s by then. And I go there as an intern. And this is to tell all of you young people that transitions can be both amazing and really frustrating, but persist, because you never know what lies on the other side. And I remember being in the London office, mid-30s, an intern reporting to editors who were in their early 20s. So, and every afternoon I would walk out into the streets of London reminding myself why I was there. Like, don't let this stuff frustrate you. And then 6 months happened. I really enjoyed my internship. And at the end of that internship, my magazine editor calls me into his office and says, I have good news and bad news for you. Good news is that I want you to write for us. Bad news is I don't have a job for you. So basically, I ended up going back to California, and I had to now earn a living. But I still also wanted to write. So for about 10 months or so, I did double duty. I went back to software. 3 or 4 days a week, I was being a contractor writing software. And the rest of the time, I was writing for my magazine in London. And I think about 10 or 11 months into that effort, I realized I could pay my bills. And that, I think, was the turning point, when I realized that I could pay my rent with writing, and I could completely switch. And since then, I've been been a full-time science writer, science journalist. Mainly, for a long, long time, I was formally associated with New Scientist magazine. I went to London, worked in the London office as a staff writer, deputy news editor, physics news editor. And then at some point, I started working on my first book, which I'll talk about in a moment. By the way, that picture that you see is one of my favorite pictures. This is Mount Erebus in Antarctica. It's the world's southernmost active volcano. I'll come to that. Well, not the volcano, but the stories about that. So I had begun working on my first book, and the first book involved a lot of travel, which I had to do in my own time and then write in my own time. And being a editor for a weekly news magazine is a formidable treadmill. You basically, like in the case of New Scientist, we would put the magazine to bed on a Tuesday evening, and then Wednesday morning you come back and you start again all over. You have to fill 80 pages of the magazine every week, and it was insanely busy. So combining that with the travel and book writing became too much. So I quit my job again. I'm very good at quitting jobs. I quit my job and then started writing for New Scientist full time, but as a correspondent who had more control over when to write. So I was writing for them full time, and that continued for a good 10 years after. But the first book was essentially a book that arose out of an interest that predated the science book. So when I was thinking about doing the transition to writing, I actually started, like I said, started writing fiction. Most of them were short stories, but I think it was late 90s, I started working on a novel, and it was meant to be an exploration of how physics makes me feel, which is a weird thing to say, but it does make me feel very liberated when I read about physics. It's an amazing thing, and I wanted to somehow explore that in fiction, and wrote a couple of chapters, proposed the idea to Penguin India, and Penguin was keen on publishing it, so they signed a contract. And I'm sorry to say that after signing the contract, I did not write a single word of that novel. And I give excuses to myself saying, oh, it was because I didn't have time, or which I didn't, because when I was writing fiction before, it was always as a antidote to a day-long session of doing software. So writing in the evening felt very good. But when you're also doing writing for a living, which I had begun doing as a science journalist, then by evening you have nothing left in you to write fiction. That was my excuse. I don't think that's the right reason. I think the right reason is that I did not know how to write that novel. Structurally, I couldn't figure out how to construct the story, because if I had known, then I would have written it. But anyway, so I let it drop. But that idea that I wanted to explore the feeling for physics persisted. And I remember sitting with my fiction editor in Bangalore, telling him that, look, I don't think I don't think I can finish the novel, but I do have this desire to explore this in nonfiction now. Now that I am a science reporter and journalist, I said, I want to start thinking about a book where I go to mountaintops and write about the telescopes on mountaintops and intersperse stories about going to mountaintops and telescopes with stories about going to mountaintops and visiting monasteries, and somehow bring about this metaphor that I found very fascinating, which is that there is a reason why monks end up on mountaintops, and there's also a reason why astronomers end up on mountaintops. And so it was my fiction editor, who said, that's a great idea, but make the book about physics. Just bookend your book with visits to mountaintops, make the bulk of it about physics. So that was the beginning of thinking about the edge of physics. Let me see if I can. So it resulted in this book. This is the US cover. And the UK cover has the same title, but a different subtitle. And you can see the marketing gimmicks that the US publishers use. Like, look at that subtitle, A Journey to Earth's Extremes to Unlock the Secrets of the Universe. I honestly don't like that subtitle. The subtitle that I liked was this one, Dispatches from the Frontiers of Cosmology, which is what it was. It was basically me going to a whole bunch of remote places and writing about what's happening there. And in India, this book is called The Edge of Reason, which was my working title. And so the US publishers looked at that title and said, it makes no sense whatsoever. This is a book about physics, so we should call it The Edge of Physics. And the Indian publishers took one look at the word physics and said, this won't sell in India, let's change it back to Edge of Reason. So anyway, that's how it is. As a writer, you have very little control over titles and subtitles and cover designs. So the thought process about the book itself, one of the things, like I said, the thing I really wanted to explore was it was an attempt at generating this particular feeling for physics. Like, how do you feel when you read about deep questions in physics? And it wasn't enough for me to write about the theoretical aspects, or I felt like by going to these extreme places on Earth, and I'll show you some pictures from some of them, I felt like a book that combined travel writing, a first-person account of going to some of these remote places and writing about these places in a certain way to evoke a sense of awe and a sense of infinity, and then combining that with exposition of the physics, both theoretical physics and experimental physics. That was the route I wanted to take, and that's how. So, but the first thing I had to do was identify, as a writer, you might have some grand ideas about what you want the book to achieve, but there still has to be a very concrete sense of what you are attempting to answer in your book. So in the case of this book, there still are, some of these questions are still pertinent in physics. But these were the big questions I thought I would address. The nature of dark matter. By the way, we don't have time to actually go into any of the science here, so I'm just giving you an overarching idea of what the books are about. But at any time later during the Q&A, you can, if you want to ask some particular question, feel free. So the book addresses, the nature of dark matter, the nature of dark energy, the matter-antimatter asymmetry. Why is the universe? We know that at least in physics as it stands tells us that matter and antimatter should have been produced in equal amounts, and yet when we look at the universe, we see only one kind, not the other. So why is that? The origin of mass, which this is related to the Higgs field and the Higgs boson, which this is one question that actually, since the book came out, has been solved in terms of the discovery of the Higgs. Questions about, are there other universes out there? And then the big question which continues to haunt physics, which is reconciling Einstein's general relativity with quantum mechanics, and those two theories are still remain incompatible. So these were the big theoretical questions I had to address, and it had to be woven into the narrative of the story of the book. And the book itself is organized as individual travels to different sites around the world. So I'll just go through quickly. This is the order in which I did the travels. So I first went to the Atacama Desert in Chile to visit something called the Very Large Telescope, which is the Very Large Telescope is actually comprised of 4 8-meter class optical telescopes, and these are really, really massive telescopes. And so the chapter kind of explores why was this telescope built in Chile? What is it about the particular environmental conditions there that make astronomy, worthwhile to do astronomy there? As you can see, I mean, there's a whole lot of reasons why. But to me, the biggest reason why Chile is so successful is Chile's own initiative in making sure that they reduce light pollution. So there's a huge, I forget how much it is, maybe 750,000 square kilometers of area that has been deemed sort of protected for astronomy. So in some of these sites near the telescopes, if you're walking with a flashlight, you cannot point the flashlight upwards or even horizontally. It has to be pointed down in order to not mess up the telescope. So there are lots and lots of rules and laws for businesses to follow, so that even street lamps don't point upwards, or even they all are particular kinds of light, and they all have to point down. So they really protect the night skies, and I think that is a huge reason, apart from genuinely interesting atmospheric and climatic conditions there that make astronomy worthwhile. I went to Lake Baikal in Siberia to look at something called a neutrino telescope. Neutrinos are these subatomic particles that, we won't go into the physics of it because I get carried away by neutrinos. But anyway, this was an underwater telescope, and the telescope is actually submerged deep inside the lake. And the one thing I'll tell you is, when I asked about visiting that site, a German scientist was acting as my contact with the Russian scientists who work there, and he said, yeah, of course you can come, but you have to come in winter. And this is Siberia, mind you. So I had to go there in peak Siberian winter, because the Russians, in their ingenuity, had figured out that they can minimize the cost of building and running the telescope if they worked in winter. So this is a telescope that it's not really a telescope in the sense of an optical telescope. It's a neutrino detector. But if it has enough resolving power in the sky, you can start arguing that it acts like a telescope. But in this case, imagine a detector that's submerged in water. The reason it's in water is because when a neutrino hits a water molecule, it generates a muon, and the muon starts moving faster than the speed of light in water. Not faster than the speed of light overall, but faster than the speed of light in water. So it creates something like an optical, it creates a Cherenkov cone of light, and that cone of light is what these detectors are looking for. And when they see that, they can reconstruct the incoming neutrino trajectory. And if you did this in summer or, first, why Lake Baikal? Because it's one of the largest bodies of absolutely crystal clear water, and it's huge. The lake is about 40 to 50 kilometers wide on average, and 800 kilometers long. So it's gigantic, and it's about 1.7 kilometers deep on average, right? And that's not including some 7 kilometers of sediment that has accumulated over 25 million years. So it's an amazing lake, extremely clear water, and so it allows you to see these neutrino tracks or the muon tracks from which you can reconstruct the neutrino. And but if so because the detectors are submerged deep inside water, if you're working there when it's summer or spring and the lake is not frozen, you need submersibles and you need ships and all sorts of equipment. And the Russians figured, let's just wait for the ice to, the lake to freeze over. So the ice becomes about a meter thick, covering all of Lake Baikal. They just use that 1 meter thick ice as a platform. So they bring in their heavy machinery, cut holes in the ice, send their divers in to, deploy the telescope or repair it or whatever. And so they do the actual scientific work of maintaining the instrument only for about 2 months when they can be on the ice. And when the ice starts melting, they're out of there. And this was the telescope that was one of the first to see neutrinos from outside. I think the atmospheric neutrinos, this was the first telescope that saw it. And they've done some really seminal work, and this has led to other neutrino telescopes around the world. But anyway, I was there like for a few days in peak winter, an astonishing experience. Then I went to see the Large Hadron Collider. This was before it was switched on, so that I could, I got the chance to get inside the tunnels and into the cavities, and so that's I think that's the Atlas detector. So again, I can keep talking about this endlessly, but I'll just go through quickly. So the Large Hadron Collider was really a chapter that explored particle physics and the search for the Higgs. Then I went to see something called the CDMS experiment, the cryogenic dark matter search, which is a direct detection experiment that is looking for the interaction of these hypothetical dark matter particles with crystals of germanium and silicon. And they have to be deep inside a mine because they use that half a mile of rock above to filter out other sources of noise that can generate the same signals in your detectors. So this was in northern Minnesota in an abandoned iron mine. Then I went to see the two Keck telescopes, these 10-meter class telescopes. They are up on Mauna Kea in Hawaii. And again, the reason for visiting that, apart from the amazing astronomy and cosmology that is going on there, is also to write the story of how this telescope was itself built. The very large telescope in Chile that I visited, each of those 8-meter class telescopes were built from a single monolithic piece of glass. So each 8-meter mirror was made from one monolithic piece of glass, whereas by the time you get to anything larger than 8 meters, it's impossible to have a single piece of glass because of a variety of reasons. So this was one of the first large telescopes which was built out of segmented mirrors, which were much smaller, I think 1.75 meters across, and the number of such segments had to be put together. Then you can imagine a completely different problem arises when you have so many different segments comprising one single mirror. You have to somehow manage the overall shape, and the shape of these mirrors, the curvature has to be, I forget the actual precision, but you're talking the curvature, a precision of microns. You have to maintain it across the surface. So then I wanted a chapter on radio astronomy, and I went to the Karoo in South Africa, which is this semi-arid region just south of the Kalahari Desert. At that time, 2007, when I went, South Africa and Australia, Western Australia, were the two sites that had been selected by the International Radio Astronomy Association. I don't know whether that's their real organizational name, but the radio astronomers of the world had selected these two sites. And I really wanted, I could have gone to either one, to either Australia or to the Karoo to write the same story. And this was again a writerly choice where I said, okay, the book is really, the West is fairly well represented in the book. I wanted Africa to be part of it, so chose to go to Karoo. And it was a weird place to go. I don't mean Africa, but the site, because this was the only place where I went to, but the telescope had not been built yet. So it was just to see the site. And it turned out to be an astonishing story to write about the land and how you do radio astronomy in these remote places. Then some of my most memorable trips were, the most memorable trip possibly was to Antarctica. A lot of time was spent on the coast, which is the US station called McMurdo Station. I was there to witness and write about these things called long duration balloon launches. So hopefully I'll play a video for you in a moment. But that picture that you see on the top is essentially a balloon that is being filled with helium, and we are standing on the Ross ice shelf, which is this gigantic mass of ice that is essentially flowing down from the East Antarctic plateau and then remains frozen as it lands on the sea and keeps continuing for a long, long time. It's the largest ice shelf in the world. If you were to read about the Ross ice shelf, they, for some reason, will always compare it to size of countries, and they'll say, oh, it's as big as France. So if you don't know how big France is, which I don't, I have no idea how I can tell you how big the Ross ice shelf is, but it's very big. So gigantic place, and it's about 150 feet thick ice that you're standing on, right? So it's like standing on land. It's massive, but of course with all the dangers that come with being on ice, crevasses, you can fall in and disappear for good. So you have to be really careful, and of course the people who take you there, in this case, the US Antarctic program, they make sure that you're reasonably well trained to be aware of all these dangers. So I was there to witness that balloon launch, and then from there to the South Pole. That picture that you see is basically the airport at South Pole, which is just a strip of ice that has been compacted. That's both where the plane lands and takes off from, the arrival lounge and the departure lounge. That's it. And the plane doesn't stay for longer than 30 minutes, because if you stay any longer, your wheels, in this case not wheels but skis, because you're landing on skis, they freeze, and then you need enormous amounts of airplane fuel to sort of fire up and get your plane dislodged from the ice. So they basically don't switch their engines off, don't stay longer than 30 minutes, and you have 30 minutes in which to deplane and board the plane. Get all the cargo out, get all the new cargo back in, and get out of there. Amazing place. So anyway, I was there to witness this thing called the construction of what has become one of the best neutrino telescopes in the world, which is the IceCube neutrino telescope. And exactly the thing that they're doing in Lake Baikal, which is monitoring water for evidence of neutrinos hitting water molecules. Here they are monitoring the ice for evidence of neutrinos hitting, again, water molecules, but in this case ice. So I got to write about the construction of that. At that time, they were drilling these 80, I think it was 80 or 60, I forget, holes into the ice. A hole is kind of a really odd way to describe something that is about 1/3 of a meter wide and 2.5 kilometers deep, and it's not drilled in the way you drill a hole with mechanical drill bits. In this case, they drill the hole by simply pumping boiling water at 1000 psi, just melting a hole right through into the ice. And you have about a day to deploy your instrument, because it's Antarctica, so within a day the entire thing will freeze all over again. So they deploy the instrument, and these instruments are now frozen, embedded in the East Antarctic ice sheet. So I have a video I want to show you about the balloon launch. Let's see if it works.
Okay, release the balloon, release the balloon. Okay, release the balloon, release the balloon, release the balloon.
So did you see something falling off at the very end? Yeah. So when the balloon was being launched, you would have seen that it wasn't really inflated, and that's because at sea level in Antarctica, it's so cold that we have chemistry experts here, so I'm going to be very careful about what I say. But basically, what's that Boyle's law, right? Some law that tells you about. Anyway, the gas doesn't inflate to the balloon doesn't inflate to its full volume. By the time the balloon gets up to the upper atmosphere, it has it's 400 feet across. So you can literally see it from the ground, even though it's at 120,000 feet or about 35 kilometers up. It's the size of half a full moon from the ground when the balloon is fully inflated. To give you a sense for how big this balloon is, in 1902, when the first Antarctic explorers, Robert Falcon Scott and Shackleton, were going on their first expedition, they were the first people to use a balloon to kind of rise above the Antarctic landmass, and their balloon was 8,000 cubic feet in volume. They were using hydrogen. 8,000 cubic feet, by the standards of this balloon, is nothing. It was a tethered balloon with a basket, and it could have only one person in it. And Scott was the first person to use that balloon, and the balloon with the tether rose to an altitude of 800 feet. Right? This balloon, from the tip of the instrument thing that you saw, all the way to the top of the balloon, is itself 1,000 feet. So if you just stood it end to end, it is higher than what Scott rose to in their initial balloon flight over Antarctica. The balloon fabric it's just as thin as a sandwich wrapper. It's extremely thin. Despite that, the balloon is so big that it weighs 2 tons, just the fabric. The payload that you saw, this was, I think, a cosmic ray experiment, is 2 tons. So you have a balloon that is going to carry a 2-ton payload to an altitude of about 35 kilometers. So it needs, huge amounts of helium. So when the balloon is fully inflated, it's, I think, about 1 million cubic feet of helium. It's a gigantic balloon, and the entire operation to launch it is something else entirely. And so there's an entire chapter in my book dedicated to explaining how amazing this project is. The reason they do these long duration balloon flights in Antarctica is they want to carry their, in this case, particle detecting experiments, cosmic ray detectors, antimatter detectors, to the edge of the atmosphere. So because the atmosphere is a huge problem for most of these experiments, it creates a lot of noise and cuts off a lot of the signals. The best way to do your experiments is just go into space using satellites, but that's an expensive operation. So they have figured out a much cheaper way to get most of the benefits of being up at the edge of space by sending the payload using these long duration balloons. And the balloons basically, in Antarctica, what happens is, and it happens only in Antarctica. Actually, it also happens in the Arctic, but the Arctic is not a good place to be doing experiments because if something falls, it falls into the water. So they go to Antarctica, and in the summer, in the Antarctic summer, which would be December for us here, there's a circumpolar anticyclone that sets up over the top of the South Pole, which means that there's the wind pattern that's going round and round just above the South Pole, and they launch the balloon so that it catches that anticyclone and then just keeps orbiting over the South Pole. So if you launch this balloon somewhere in say across India or across the US, it would just go just across the continent, and you would have to run after it, and there's no way you're going to chase it. But here you just have to stand and watch it go round and round above you, and when it's finished collecting the data that it wants, usually the experiment lasts about 2 to 3 weeks. They detonate an explosive and detach the payload, and the payload parachutes down. Unfortunately, the balloon fabric, which is a giant amount of plastic, ends up somewhere, which is God knows which whale or has eaten that stuff. But hopefully it falls on the ice and doesn't end up in the water. Yeah, it's an extraordinary sight to watch. So, and then because remember I mentioned earlier that I wanted to write about monasteries, and my fiction editor told me, bookend your book with visits to monasteries. So I ended up visiting a monastery that was actually not very far away from where Edwin Hubble did his pioneering work with cosmology. So the Mount Wilson Observatory in California, which is right next to Pasadena. And then from there you drive a few hours up north and you end up in this new Camaldolese monastery. So my opening chapter is a history chapter about how observational cosmology began at Mount Wilson, and from there that chapter has a few pages about visiting this particular monastery. Um, Lots of stories to be told here. It was quite amazing. And then the book it is bookended with a visit to the Hanle Observatory in Ladakh. So, and again, the amazing coincidence of standing on the hilltop where the telescope is in Hanle and looking across this lake bed, and about 4 kilometers away is this 400-year-old Buddhist monastery. So on the top is the telescope that you're seeing, and the bottom part is a view from the hill where the telescope is looking at the Buddhist monastery. Right? So I really didn't have to work very hard as a writer to make the metaphor work. I just had to describe what I was observing, and the metaphor worked for itself. So it was. So this was the, this is basically what led to this book. So each book is a recounting of the visits to these places, descriptions about people working there, the geography, the geology, anything that I could use as a writer, and then interspersed with theoretical physics, experimental physics, etc. So sorry. God, I have to figure out how to operate this. As I was finishing this book, it was almost ready for publication. My editor, I was talking to my editor, and she was saying, "Okay, do you have an idea for your next book?" And I, at that point, really wanted to write something about the nature of the self. And this is a fascination I've had since my 20s about, and I think some of it just comes out of growing up in India, where if you have any questions about things like the self, there are 20 people who are going to tell you something, and all different stuff, and everyone has their opinion. So somewhere that question was there in my mind, and I wanted to explore it. And I remember having this half an hour long chat with my editor about wanting to write about the self, and she listens to me very patiently, and at the end of it says, all you have is a topic in your head. You just say you want to write about the self, but you have no idea what the story is. So why don't you just go about and think more about what is it, how are you going to write this thing about the self? So I dropped the idea for a while, and then there came a point where I was beginning to write articles about consciousness and self for New Scientist magazine, and once when I was interviewing a scientist in the UK, he was talking about his work explaining the neuroscientific basis of the self by using his understanding of what happens during depersonalization disorder, which is a condition where this sense of mindness that we have, like right now, if you're feeling any emotions or if you're feeling any sensations, everything that you're experiencing has an implicit sense of mindness. Like you don't even question it. It feels like yours. Now just try and imagine what if the sensations you are feeling, even though they're happening to you, don't feel like yours. What would that be? Well, that's depersonalization. And it's a very, very debilitating neuropsychological condition. So anyway, he was using his understanding of that condition to then explain something about his theories about the self. And that's when kind of a light bulb went off for me, saying that, if he can use depersonalization to explain some particular aspect of the self, can we not examine a whole range of conditions, each one of which disturbs the self in a different way, and take our understanding of both the disturbance of how, let me just run you through the conditions and you'll see what I mean. So I essentially ended up picking these 8 conditions: Cotard syndrome, Alzheimer's, something called BIID, body integrity identity disorder. I'll go through it in a bit. Schizophrenia, depersonalization, autism, outer body, and ecstatic epilepsy. The idea was each one of these conditions, so the way I selected them was they each had to disrupt our sense of self in a different way. So the way you perceive yourself right now, right? I'm pretty sure that all of us right now are experiencing ourselves as a unified whole, like the sense of your body, the sense of being a story in your head, the sense of your identity, if you're a student or faculty or whatever, everything is, comes together in a unified way, and you experience that whole thing as one. But each one of these conditions takes apart one of these things, right? Alzheimer's will take away your narrative slowly, right? This question, like if I ask you, who are you? Each one of us, when we try to answer that question cognitively, we'll give a narrative answer. We'll tell a story about ourselves. And that story depends on our episodic memories. And those episodic memories in turn depend on the fact that every experience that you're having which first enters short-term memory and then gets incorporated into long-term episodic memory. All of those processes have to be working in order for you to have a narrative to narrate. And it turns out that Alzheimer's starts essentially destroying your short-term memory formation and episodic memory formation, and eventually destroys existing episodic memories. So it fundamentally destroys your story. And besides a lot of other issues that it creates, one of the first manifestations of Alzheimer's is that people are unable to tell you who they are in a coherent form. So if you meet somebody with mid-stage Alzheimer's, they will be cogent enough to talk to you and tell you stories about themselves. But if you know who they really are in terms of their life history, you will see that they're completely mixing up their stories, and they won't know. Maybe sometimes they know, but sometimes they won't. So each of the choices that I made had to do with disrupting a different aspect of oneself. So BIID or xenomelia is something that destroys or disrupts a sense of body ownership. Like if I stretch out my hand, I don't even have to stretch it out. I have an implicit feeling that this hand is mine. I mean, it's a stupid question to be even asking why. No one will dispute that your hand belongs to you or it feels like yours. Right? Your entire body. That's essentially what a bodily self should be. It should feel like you. And it turns out in BIID, there are people who will say that, oh, this part of my body doesn't belong to me, or this part of my leg doesn't belong to me. And they'll go to extreme lengths to, it's as if something cancerous is attached to you. It's a horrendous thing to be feeling. And they will go to extreme lengths to actually, deal with that, including self-amputation sometimes. So, but again, from my perspective, I was choosing conditions that were disrupting different aspects of the self. So schizophrenia, for instance, is again a very diverse and complicated condition. But one of the things it disrupts is this thing called sense of agency. Right, a fundamental part of being a self or a human self is that we feel like we are agents of our actions. So if I click this, let me come back to the thing. So if I click this, I have an implicit sensation of being the agent of this action. I feel like I have willed this action into existence. Again, it's implicit. We never question these things. But if you are someone with schizophrenia, it's possible, not everyone with schizophrenia, but a lot of people with schizophrenia will click this and not necessarily feel like they did it. Right? So there's something about schizophrenia disrupts this sense of agency that we all have implicitly with our actions. And you can imagine all the downstream consequences of a disruption of something as basic as the sense of agency. Right? Out-of-body experiences, again, each one of us right now is having an in-body experience. We feel like we are in this body, located in this region of space and time, and observing the world from behind our eyes, etc. And all of those things go together to creating what's called an in-body experience. And again, we don't question this at all because that's how the biology is supposed to function. But what is very obvious from people who report out-of-body experiences is that these things come apart. You can be, if you're having an out-of-body experience, you can have a perspective. Like right now, my perspective is looking at you from behind my eyes. And each one of you is experiencing looking at this, in front of you from behind your eyes. You can end up, if you're having a particular kind of out-of-body experience, you can end up out there at the corner of the room looking at this whole room. But it's not real in the sense that what is amazing, and when you start looking at it from a scientific perspective, is that even the in-body experience that we are having is a very, very formidable computation that's happening in the brain and body moment by moment. And we even know some of the details about it. It's like a computation that's happening at 8 hertz, like once every 8 seconds the brain and body are computing your exact location, everything, and putting it all together. It's like frames of a video. We don't realize that we are discontinuous things. It just feels continuous to us, but there's a computation going on at a particular frequency, and that computation comes apart. So sometimes the computation that locates our sense of being an I, a self behind in our head, that computation can go wrong and it can locate it somewhere else, and you will have a feeling of being somewhere else, not in your body. So all of these things were attempts at looking at the various ways in which the self comes apart, and then trying to make a thesis about the fact that the entire self, the way we perceive what we are, who we are, including our bodily self, is a construction, moment by moment construction that's happening in the brain. And fundamentally nothing actually real about it in the way that it feels to us. It is a construction, right? So that whole book was an exploration of the neuroscientific basis of that argument. The reporting involved in this book was quite harrowing at times because I had to speak, and this was actually the most rewarding and fulfilling aspect of it also, meeting people who are willing to discuss their inner lives, people suffering from these conditions, but willing to discuss how it felt, sharing their lived experience of being someone with schizophrenia or someone experiencing out-of-body experiences, etc. And then, of course, talking to neuroscientists, philosophers, theologians also, because there's a lot of work about the nature of the self that has happened in theology. And then putting it all together to have a coherent thesis about, what the self might be. How are we doing for time? I'm completely lost. Yeah, we're okay? Oh, there's a clock there. Okay, cool. I'll quickly run through the next two books. So the next one was Through Two Doors at Once. This was an exploration of quantum mechanics through the lens of one single experiment. All of you probably will be very familiar with the double slit experiment, which is simply the Young's double slit experiment where you shine a light through two slits. In this case, it has to be coherent light, single frequency, and it will create this interference pattern on a screen behind. And the quantum mechanical version of this is if you were to do an experiment with individual photons of light sent one at a time, so that you're guaranteed that there's only one photon in the experimental apparatus at any given time, even then you will get this interference pattern. The interference pattern is, of course, proof that something is interfering, which means that there is a wave-like aspect to whatever is going through the two slits. But in the case of a quantum experiment, you're actually sending individual photons of light, which are individual photons that cannot be subdivided any further. So then what is going through the two slits? So this particular experiment turns out to be a gold mine for exploring the big questions in quantum mechanics. So this whole book is essentially a 100-year history of the double slit experiment done in various ways to try and understand the quantum world. So the book basically describes the quantum double slit experiment and gives a brief history of the development of quantum mechanics, and then launches into all the variations of the double slit that have been done over the decades, over the last century. So Wheeler's delayed choice, the quantum eraser, etc. All different ways of trying to get at this underlying issue of what is going through both slits. Because if you could answer that effectively, you have learned something about the nature of reality. And mind you, we still haven't, right? So there are a whole number of interpretations of the mathematical formalism of quantum mechanics, and also new formulations that try and come up with new theories of the quantum world. All of which can be then understood from the perspective of the double slit, because whatever these theories are, whatever these interpretations are, they still have to explain the double slit experiment. So this book is, it doesn't arrive at any answer. We still don't know the answer to, quote unquote, what is real, in the sense that what is the mathematical formalism of quantum mechanics telling us about the underlying reality. We have interpretations, and we have new sort of variations on the standard quantum theory. But this book is an exploration of all of those various ways of thinking about the quantum world. And I leave the reader probably just as dissatisfied as when they began, because there are, maybe with a better understanding of the questions. Same thing with the book on the self. At the very end, you're left with still, a question that persists. Science, for all it has done, and this is true of theology also. No one has answered these questions, despite what people might claim. At the end of it, my effort was to leave the reader with an appreciation for what the questions are, because some of these are still deeply, deeply difficult questions to answer. Finally, this is my last book, which came out last year. As a writer, that I was beginning to encounter more and more stories about AI and machine learning over the last 10 years or so, and then I think the software engineer in me kind of got excited all over again, because here was finally a subject where normally when I write about particle physics, I interview the physicist and understand it to the best of my abilities, and then start communicating those ideas. And I never have any illusions about doing particle physics or doing neuroscience. But when I started talking to machine learning people and they were talking about software, I think, okay, hang on, this is something I can do. So I ended up teaching myself how to code deep neural networks, and learned went back to programming all over again, taught myself the math, and then ended up, and I was doing all this just to learn machine learning and AI. I wasn't thinking about a book, but then as I kept learning more and more, I think the writer part of me saw a story here, which was essentially telling the story of the social and mathematical history of machine learning. So the task involved was identifying what I thought, this is a subjective list, but what I thought were really crucial sort of algorithms that underlie modern day machine learning. So going back to the perceptron and Adeline, this was late 1950s, early 1960s. Things like optimal Bayes and naive Bayes classifiers, nearest neighbor, support vector machines, Hopfield networks, and then finally deep neural networks, which is the modern day machine learning. So identifying all these algorithms and then figuring out what is the basic math that you need. I really wanted to write a book with math in it. I did not want to avoid getting into the weeds here, unlike the other books which were fairly serious in the content, but nonetheless they kind of kept it at a certain level of abstraction so that an interested lay reader could read the book without getting bogged down. But this book unfortunately requires some exposure to math, maybe high school, like a good high school level math or first year undergraduate math. So part of the effort was identifying just what the basic math is that you need to be able to appreciate what's going on in machine learning and AI. Right? And then figuring out also, as a writer, you're just trying to figure out what are the concepts that you absolutely want in the book. So things like explaining gradient descent or principal component analysis, wonderful things called kernel functions. So a whole bunch of stuff, but again, narrowing it down to the list that really can be put together in a book. I did not avoid the math, so this is an actual page from the book. There's about 150 pages of this in that book. So, and it was very important for me to, kind of fully embrace the math. I felt like we need something in kind of popular literature that doesn't avoid the math because of the change that is upon us in terms of AI and ML. We need more than the people who are just building these systems. We need a whole class of other people who are going to be using these systems to appreciate it at the level of the math. So this was an effort to do that. And then, of course, the reporter writer in me was also very fascinated by the historical details. So this involved kind of interviewing, many of the pioneers in the field. So in this list, except for Frank Rosenblatt, who came up with the first artificial neuron in the late 1950s, he died in, I think, 1960s or 1970. Everyone else is still around, and I could talk to them. For instance, this is Jeff Hinton. This entire reporting for this book happened over the COVID period. So one of the joys, I shouldn't call it joys, but one of the good things about what happened was we got Zoom. So every interview of mine is on video that I have. It's like a treasure trove of stuff talking to people like Hinton. And yeah, so that's those are the 4 books. Sorry.
Fantastic. I just started reading your Why Machines Learn. I'm just enjoying the math in it.
Thank you.
Right. And just a off-topic question almost, right? As a writer across so many years, how what's your? I mean, things have changed so much, right? I mean, in terms of the information overload and so on. So how do you handle all of these things, right? I mean, do you right from, do you throw away your phone while writing to, how do you handle all of these
distractions?
Not just distractions, but just, the access to knowledge and, unlike, going to a library and reading, sitting with 10 books and today you have everything at your fingertips, but it's just too much too.
So, I mean, this is a question I've asked myself, like, why do I write? Like I said very early on, I became a writer because for me it was my way of finding meaning in what I do. And so the act of writing is really an act of paying attention to the world, and writing is my form of being quiet and deeply involved in something. So while I agree that there are a lot of distractions out there in terms of information overload, once you have a piece of writing that you're focusing on, then everything else shuts down for me. So and in fact this afternoon I was beginning to feel exactly what you're talking of, like continually being distracted, and my impulse is I need to start on another book and quieten myself down for another 5 years. So So yeah, writing for me is just a very meaningful thing to be doing. I remember putting out a tweet about a month ago where, people ask somewhat similar questions saying that, are you going to use AI for writing? And personally for me, I'll never use AI for writing because that takes away the very reason for why I write, right? I'm not writing because the output has to be good. I'm writing because I want to write. Saying that, I have no qualms about using stable diffusion to generate images because I cannot sketch for nuts. I don't know how to sketch. So something else that I don't have a similar feeling towards, I will use AI for. So somebody else might say, oh, they will never use AI for sketching or painting, but they'll use it for writing. It's going to happen. I think we have to figure out what is it that we do and why we do it. If that's meaning generating for us, then I would say don't use AI for that, and use it for everything else if you want. But there are things each one of us will want to do because it has meaning to us personally, and whatever that might be. Yeah, I don't know how long it will last. I'm still worried about it.
Thank you. It was a good talk. I had read one of the books, that is The Man Who Wasn't There. Half the way through, I went to sort of depression because when I started teaching, if I don't, if I forget something, then am I having Alzheimer or is it? That was the first reaction. And some of my friends who had taken, not me, who had taken LSD and all that, had told me about this out of body experiences they have had. So towards the end, you were talking on that book about, looks like there's no final conclusion on the self. Do you have any comments on that?
So one of the things that happened for me personally, before I started writing the book, I was fairly agnostic about the theories. Like if you look at whether it's from theology or philosophy of mind, or even in neuroscience, the nature of consciousness is still debated. The nature of the self is still debated, and there were two things. First, I was agnostic about the answers, but to be honest, I didn't even understand what these people were arguing about, right? When theologians or philosophers argue about the nature of the self, I could not even figure out what on earth they were going on about. So the writing of the book kind of, for me, coalesced the question. Like it really brought the question home. And I think what happened, because I was so focused on understanding it empirically and writing it from a scientific lens, I think I have become a materialist. I really think that there is nothing beyond matter, which is not necessarily, even in that position, there is still lack of empirical evidence. So even when a materialist says that with conviction, they have to acknowledge that there is, strong empirical evidence, proving that is not yet there. Neither is it there for any claim about the nature of the self or consciousness, even as to what consciousness is, what the self is, etc. The only thing I can say with conviction is that every aspect of yourself that you take to be real is actually a construction. Correct. Even this feeling that you have of this hand is mine, which is a completely unequivocal feeling within you, is a piece of information in your brain. That information can be corrupted, and if it is corrupted, you will suddenly feel like this hand is not yours, and you have no way of change. Like you are not separate from that piece of information. So, and just about every aspect of ourselves is constructed. What remains at the very end is there is still a question about the nature of subjectivity that needs to be answered. Like why does, like somebody might say, oh, I feel like I'm the agent of my action when I click this, clicker, or I'm not the agent of this action, like which might happen in schizophrenia. There's still the question of who is the I, or what is the I that is experiencing either the sense of agency or the lack of agency. That is unanswered. So I'm a materialist in the sense that I think that even that last thing, the I, is also a construction. But we don't have good computational theories yet of how that might come about.
And secondly, people here, we always tell students, or even I have been told by many, look, don't put your foot in many things. Just focus on one particular thing that may, on one particular research topic or something. That's what is commonly spoken. Well, I'm very happy to see you have gone a big spectrum. So what will be your advice on that?
Oh dear, don't follow my advice. That's all. I'm just following my curiosity, honestly. I really feel like all of these questions are circling some drain, some larger question that even I am unaware of. And with the writing of the book on AI, some of those questions started clarifying, right? The book on AI seems to be about math of kernel methods and principal component analysis, but in the end, it is about a computational view of machines. And if materialism is correct, then we are also machines, albeit very, very complicated, sophisticated biological machines. And some of, there's plenty of evidence that our brains are also doing PCA, principal component analysis, right? There are experiments with monkeys that show that when a monkey is perceiving something visual and that information is being processed in the visual cortex, and the monkey has to make a decision, a yes-no decision based on what it perceives, and that signal for the decision comes from the prefrontal cortex, you can show mathematically that the signal that is being generated in the prefrontal cortex is a principal component of the information that's in the visual cortex. So yeah, our brains are also doing linear algebra, we just don't know about it. So somewhere all of these are circling some larger question, like whether it's the questions about the what the universe is, the nature of matter itself, or quantum mechanics. It's all about the nature of reality somewhere, and we are part of that. So I feel like I'm just following my curiosity, and it can be fruitful sometimes and really debilitating otherwise. So be careful. That's all I can say.
Thank you. Thanks for that.
A nice talk. I have just two questions. Okay, one is regarding your book on the double slit experiment, because around the same time I think there were other two books one by Philip Ball and Adam Becker, right? So I would like to know whether it's a matter of coincidence or something, like when you pitch an idea to an editor, right, the word goes out and the other publishers also talk to other authors, and then suddenly you have some
both,
books
so
coming with on
Adam,
similar topics.
Yeah, good question. My book unfortunately came out 3 months after Adam's and Philip's book. Both of them are friends. Adam in particular is a good friend. We actually sat in cafes in Berkeley discussing our books simultaneously while we were writing it. So there is a follow the herd mentality in publishing. In this case, I don't think the reason why the publishers chose to publish the individual, they're different publishers. So I know why my editor went for my book when I proposed it. I don't know the reason for Adams or Phillips. What had happened was I had finished Manu wasn't there, and my editor was asking, okay, what book do you want to write next? And I wanted to write a book about the nature of pain and what it tells us about the nature of consciousness. And my editor liked it a lot, but then came back a couple of weeks later saying, I took it to my editorial meeting and my entire editorial staff was very depressed. They do not want to touch this topic of pain and consciousness, so you better find something else. And in pretty much in frustration, after trying out a few ideas with him, which he kept shooting down, I had a 4-page write-up from 2011. So this was in 2015. So from 4 years prior, I had a 4-page write-up that I had sent to my agent about writing a book on the double slit experiment in quantum mechanics, and my agent had said, oh, this is not a book, you should just write a feature article and be done with it. So I dropped it. So just in frustration, I sent that those 4 pages to my editor saying, okay, look at this. And he comes back the next day saying, yes, this is the book we should do. It turns out the reason why he selected that and the way I had pitched it was it's going to be a short, sweet book, right? And I don't know if you remember, Carlo Rovelli had come out with a book which was about it's 100 pages long. It did really well. So all of the publishers jumped on the bandwagon of, we want really short science books. And so when my publisher agreed to do the quantum mechanics one, he thought I was writing a 100-page book. I ended up writing 300 pages, and so it didn't meet his specs. But they all have a herd mentality. It's entirely possible they were reacting to the same forces. But there's the other thing. There's a zeitgeist in science itself. Like there's a reason why we all as writers might have coalesced on the same topic, which is because as writers doing this for a living, we kind of have a sense for an accumulation of evidence that now suddenly deserves a story. So, and more often than not, that can be the bigger driving force that multiple writers are finding out. We all end up writing different books. None of these 3 books, the other 2 books are mine, are not the same. They're very different. but may be triggered by the same impulse.
Okay, thank you. My next question is about your the last book, The Why Machines Learn. You have mentioned that you have decided to omit the subscripts, right? I think.
Oh my God, the
So
subscript.
is there
yes.
going to be a reprint with subscripts? Or?
No. So this is a this was a yeah, I've got a lot of heat for omitting subscripts from mathematically minded readers. No, it's going to be a lot of work to and publish. So there are people who are very upset with me about omitting subscripts, and I don't know what to say to them. And my impulse was I thought I was making it more readable, and being selfish because when you're writing a book and every line has the equation with a subscript in it, it's much easier to write it in a way where there are no subscripts. So it was a combination of me being a bit lazy and genuinely thinking that it was going to be easier for readers. Because if you watch any online lectures, right, like let's say you watch, and I used to watch a lot of them when I was learning, the lecturer is not putting subscripts. They're literally writing X1, W1, X2, they're not saying X subscript 1, W subscript. So a lot of the readers who will be reading this book are people who are kind of exposed to that stuff. So my hope was that, so long answer to your question saying no, there won't be another edition, sadly. I do switch to subscript halfway through the book, so maybe I've satisfied both sets of people. Who? Where's that? Oh, yeah.
First is like what kind of career being an author is, and like what are the different unique experience that you had, like being this kind of person who's traveling, writing books and all.
Oh, the experiences have been immensely rewarding, right? I mean, I don't even know where to begin because imagine going to, all the 7 continents, to these remote places, experiencing not just the places but the people who are working there, and the kind of intensity it takes to do experiments in these remote locations. So writing about them, interacting with them, is life changing, right? Also meeting, I showed you the slide of, one slide had Jeff Hinton and me talking, right? So one of the pleasures of this career has been interacting with people who are just amazing, right? So like when Why Machines Learn came out, just 2 months after it came out, the Physics Nobel was announced, and so 2 of the people I write about in the book, to whom entire chapters are dedicated, which is Hinton's work and John Hopfield's work, both win the Nobel. Same thing happened with Through Two Doors at Once. There are 2 chapters in there, one describing Alain Aspec's work and then another one Zeilinger's work, and both of them win the Nobel. I'm not saying I was the causal influence here, but saying that you get to meet these amazing people, right? And I mean, there are lots of experiences, like especially with both the man who wasn't there and the edge of physics. I could stand here for hours telling you stories about.
Like, can you name them other than like putting adjectives to them, like amazing and all?
I don't know if you have time. Somebody has to tell me. Literally, I can go on for hours. So I'll let Shweta decide. Yeah, we can talk afterwards.
Like, how about being an author as a career?
Being an author, the career as an author has strong ups and downs. The ups are, obviously you're doing what you love. The negatives are it's a very hard life in terms of sustaining yourself as a writer. So whoever is choosing to become one needs to weigh the consequences of this choice. So it's not a easy career path. So yeah, you want to be doing this if this is what makes, in my case it was meaningful, and I was just energized by it. And if that's not the case, then I would be very wary of stepping into this career. Yeah. So about 8 years ago, I got myself a email ID called frommattertomind@gmail.com. So that kind of gives away the book I want to write. I basically want to write a book about how the universe has gone from matter to mind. Right? It's that very phrase kind of acknowledges the materialistic perspective. Right? Matter comes first and then mind. But it could be wrong. because empirical evidence is lacking. That would be one book I would want to write. And then I'm kind of thinking about a sequel to Why Machines Learn, because so much has happened in the last 10 years, which actually the book doesn't cover. Why Machines Learn, kind of, the math stops in the 2000s, and there have been formidable changes to AI, especially deep learning stuff that has happened in the last 10 years. And I'm still trying to figure out a mathematical umbrella to talk about what has happened. I don't want to write a book that simply lists the various things that have happened, but find some conceptual framework to bring all that together. So I'm thinking about that. My heart would be wanting to write about how we got to mind from matter.
So just one last question,
Sure.
probably. So I was about to
I'm
ask,
happy to stand here and talk, so it's up to the organizers. I can go on, but not a problem.
I thought of asking two questions here, but somehow they were answered. Specifically about the Nobel Prizes. After you wrote the books, the Nobel Prizes happened. I'll aspect one. That
So please don't at all miss. I'm just telling you, don't let anyone say that the books caused it. Obviously not. Like that's such a silly claim to make. I'm just saying that I got the chance to meet these amazing people well before they got the Nobels, and it's almost it would be much harder for me to meet them now and have the discussions I had, because they'll be much more inaccessible now. But before, it was like the Edge of Physics starts, the prologue starts with me sitting in a cafe with Saul Perlmutter. This was 2004 Christmas Eve, and Saul Perlmutter won the Nobel in 2011, I think, for the discovery of dark energy. And you don't get to sit in a cafe drinking coffee for 2 hours with a Nobel laureate, which it happened before he got the Nobel, so that was possible. Yeah.
So the other point I wanted to ask you was, like, you might have collected a lot of information throughout this writing these books. Like, so do you store this information, like, which is accessible to everybody, or?
My laptop. No, not accessible. No, not accessible. So as a journalist, that's one of the things you have to be really careful about, right? Your sources, they trust that you will keep your conversations confidential. So the only thing that is in the public is the quotes that I use in my book. But like, I have videos of me talking with Hinton and others that I would not be able to share as a journalist.
But other than, like, the ones that you published, that you might have collected some data that can be given to public. Do you think such kind of things are there, or nothing like that?
Depends on what you mean by data. Like,
I mean, like, for example, when you went to the Edge of the Physics, while writing that, you might have collected a lot of data on various things. Everything cannot be kept inside the book, because the book is going lengthier.
So if it's not actual conversations with my sources, then there's a lot of other information. There is, but I would not know what to do with it. I mean, I have folders and folders and folders of information. So for each book, But I can't release that publicly, and it'll take too much work to organize it in a way that is acceptable. Good. All right. Thank you very much, guys. Thanks. It's a huge pleasure.
I now invite Ms. Sujata, the Vice President of ACR office, to present the memento as token of appreciation.